Why does a 2-month-old baby get a whooping cough vaccine, but has to wait a full calendar year to get the measles vaccine?
Yeah, that's a massive gap that confuses a lot of people.
Right. And if you have ever worked in a pediatric clinic, or, if you are a nursing student cramming for your boards right now, or honestly, even if you're just someone who is endlessly curious about public health, you have probably stared at the childhood immunization schedule.
Absolutely.
And it looks incredibly intimidating. I mean, it's like a chaotic, color-coded tax form crossed with like an engineering blueprint. You've got the primary grids, the catch-up blocks, the footnotes.
It really is just the absolute definition of information density. I mean, people look at it and they just see a wall of dates and acronyms.
Exactly. And today, the mission for this deep dive is to decode that timeline. The timeline that every nurse, every clinician, and really every curious learner should know.
Because we aren't just going to look at what is on that chart. We are going to look at why it is there.
Right, because when a parent asks you, why does my baby need this specific shot today? Answering, because the chart says so, just doesn't cut it.
It really doesn't. And to really get to the why, we have to fundamentally redefine what that schedule actually is.
Okay, so what is it then?
Well, a lot of people, even some practicing clinicians, assume the schedule is just a biological speed run. Like the fastest, safest way to get a kid vaccinated.
Right, like just check the boxes as fast as possible.
Exactly. But what you are looking at is actually a massive, highly complex optimization problem. It is basically a piece of health systems engineering.
Health systems engineering, I always thought of it as purely medical. What makes it an optimization problem?
Because you are balancing multiple, sometimes completely competing immunology is the foundation, of course.
Yeah, the biology part.
Right. But layered directly on top of the biology, you have manufacturing supply realities, you have insurance billing codes.
Oh, wow, I didn't even think about the billing codes.
Yeah, and you have the physical limit to how many clinic visits a family can realistically manage without just, dropping out of the system entirely. Plus, the actual epidemiology of what diseases are circulating right now in a specific region.
So biology is really just the starting point. It's like the outer boundaries.
Exactly. Everything inside those boundaries is negotiated. It's engineered. And that is why the U.S. schedule looks different from the U.K. schedule, which looks different from Nigeria's.
That makes a lot of sense. So to understand how we ended up with this multi-page, hyper-engineered chart, we should probably look at how we went from just a single shot to this massive, globally coordinated system.
We definitely should. Because for most of the 20th century, the schedule wasn't really a schedule at all.
It was barely a short list, right?
Yeah, barely. You had smallpox, then you had DTP, which is diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and then polio. That was pretty much the entire landscape.
And the underlying logic for all of this traces all the way back to 1796 with Edward Jenner.
Right, the cowpox experiment.
Yeah, he inoculated an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps with cowpox to protect him against smallpox.
And that single intervention established the core biological premise that really drives everything on today's chart, which is you introduce a controlled artificial exposure to train the immune system.
Before it inevitably encounters a wild, dangerous exposure.
Exactly. But the schedule as a system, that doesn't really happen until after World War II. That's when things just explode.
Right, because we get the DTP combo in the 40s and 50s. Jonas Salk develops the inactivated polio vaccine in 1955.
And then Albert Sabin brings out the live oral polio vaccine around 1961. So suddenly pediatricians just have a lot of tools.
Which I imagine create a massive amount of chaos.
Oh, total chaos. Someone had to sequence all of these new vaccines so they wouldn't conflict biologically or completely overwhelm families with endless doctor visits.
So who stepped in to fix that?
In 1964, the U.S. established the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP.
Okay, ACIP.
Yeah, and their explicit job was to standardize these recommendations. Because before that committee existed, timing was essentially just left up to the judgment of individual doctors.
Which sounds like a logistical nightmare. And globally, the World Health Organization steps in a decade later, right? In 1974.
Yes, with the expanded program on immunization, the EPI, and the realization the WHO had at that moment is fascinating.
What did they realize?
Well, they had just run this massive, successful campaign against smallpox. But they looked around and realized that 6 other diseases, diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus, measles, polio, and tuberculosis, were still killing millions of children in low-income countries.
And the vaccines for these already existed.
Exactly. The bottleneck wasn't the laboratory science anymore. The bottleneck was the schedule and the delivery infrastructure.
Organizing a schedule sounds like it should be a simple logistical puzzle, like setting up a train timetable.
A train timetable.
Yeah, like you just figure out when the tracks are clear and you send the trains through one by one so they don't crash.
It's a good analogy, but it breaks down pretty quickly when you look at the biology. It's actually more like trying to plant a complex garden where the soil chemistry is violently changing every single month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you're navigating a biological landscape inside the infant that is entirely dynamic.
Okay, let's get into those changing soil conditions then. The tug of war happening inside the infant's immune system, because you have to start by looking at what the baby inherits from the mother, right?
Right. During the third trimester, a fetus receives a massive transfer of IgG antibodies across the placenta from the mother.
And IgG stands for immunoglobulin G.
Correct. Which are essentially small, highly specific proteins that act as lock and key defenders. And because they are small enough to cross the placenta, they provide passive immunity to the newborn.
Wait, hold on. A mother's antibodies are a good thing, right? They protect the baby, so why would we care if they interact with a vaccine? Isn't the baby protected either way?
It seems counterintuitive, I know. Those borrowed antibodies are crucial for keeping the newborn alive. But vaccines are essentially target practice for the baby's own immune system.
Okay, target practice.
Yeah, and if you introduce a live vaccine, like the MMR for measles, mumps, and rubella too early, the mother's aggressive IgG antibodies will instantly neutralize the vaccine virus.
Should just wipe it out.
They clear it out completely before the baby's own T cells and B cells ever get a chance to even see it and build their own long-term memory.
Oh, I see. So the mother's security force is so good, it basically kicks the training dummy out of the building before the baby's security force can even look at it.
That is a perfect way to describe it. That is the exact mechanism of maternal interference. And it is precisely why the MMR vaccine waits until 12 to 15 months of age.
Because you have to wait for that borrowed immunity to completely fade.
Exactly.
But I've seen situations where there is a measles outbreak and public health officials suddenly recommend giving infants a dose at 6 months. How does that work if the mother's antibodies are still hanging around?
Well, in an outbreak setting, the risk calculation changes. You give that early dose at 6 months to try and squeeze out whatever protection you can as those maternal antibodies begin to wane.
Just in case they faded enough to let the vaccine work.
Right. But here is the critical rule for anyone studying the schedule. That early dose does not count toward the routine series.
Ah, because you can't guarantee it actually trained the baby's immune system.
Exactly. You still have to give the standard doses later on once you are absolutely sure the maternal antibodies are completely gone to guarantee durable immunity.
Okay, so that covers maternal interference. But once that borrowed immunity fades, you hit the opposite problem, right? A massive vulnerability gap.
Yes. The newborn's own adaptive immune system isn't fully mature yet.
And pertussis, or whooping cough, is basically the most terrifying example of this gap.
It really is. Infants under 2 months are highly vulnerable to the pertussis bacteria. They have no protection of their own, and the infection can cause fatal apnea.
Which means they don't just cough, they simply stop breathing. It's terrifying. And that is exactly why the DTaP vaccine, which is diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis, starts exactly at 2 months.
So 2 months is the magic number.
It is the very moment the infant's immune system can finally mount a meaningful antibody response to the acellular components of that vaccine.
Now, when you say acellular, what does that actually mean in terms of what the baby's immune system is looking at?
It means we aren't using the whole pertussis bacterial cell. We are just using purified pieces of specific proteins.
Okay.
So the infant's immune system has to be mature enough to piece that puzzle together and recognize those proteins as a threat.
So it's kind of like showing the immune system a wanted poster with just a few distinct facial features
Yeah.
rather than showing them the actual criminal.
That's a really good way to put it. But, because of that terrifying 2-month gap before the baby can even process that wanted poster, public health relies on a neighboring concept called the cocooning strategy.
Right. This is where you vaccinate the pregnant mother. Exactly. You give the mother the Tdap vaccine, ideally between 27 and 36 weeks of gestation.
So she builds up immunity right before birth.
Right. By boosting the mother's immunity then, she produces a fresh, massive surge of antibodies that pass across the placenta. You are actively building a bridge of borrowed immunity over that dangerous, unvaccinated window for the newborn.
That is so smart. But if we're timing the schedule around the mother's fading antibodies and the baby's own vulnerable gaps, Why are some shots given over and over again?
You mean the boosters?
Yeah, like the DTaP is given at 2, 4, 6, and 15 to 18 months, and then another booster at 4 to 6 years. That is 5 total doses just to establish memory.
Well, a young immune system often needs repeated exposure to a specific antigen to build long-lived memory cells. And immunity to different pathogens just decays at different rates.
So the pertussis protection fades quickly.
Yes, the cellular pertussis vaccine requires constant reinforcement to keep the antibody levels high enough to prevent disease.
But the MMR is different.
Right. Meanwhile, a live attenuated vaccine like MMR replicates inside the body just enough to provide a massive, robust training session, which is why it only requires 2 doses for lifetime protection.
Okay, so immunology clearly sets the outer boundaries of this schedule. But when you look at the sources for this deep dive, the exact rules within those boundaries weren't just calculated in some pristine lab.
No, not at all.
They were forged by real-world trials, errors, and frankly, some massive historical disasters.
It is so vital to view the schedule as a living document. It is constantly reacting to post-marketing surveillance.
Post-marketing meaning after it's already approved and out there.
Exactly. The CDC and FDA co-manage a system called VAERs, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It tracks safety signals after a vaccine is in wide use.
And the rotavirus vaccine is a perfect example of this living document in action, isn't it?
It really is. On the modern schedule, the rotavirus vaccine like Rotatech has a very strict, weirdly specific rule.
What's the rule?
The first dose absolutely must be given before 15 weeks of age.
15 weeks? That's so specific. Why?
That 15-week cutoff is a direct response to a previous failure. In 1999, an earlier version of a rotavirus vaccine called RotaShield was actually withdrawn from the market.
Oh, wow. Why was it pulled?
The VAER system detected an elevated risk of something called intussusception.
Wait, intussusception, what exactly is that?
It's a severe condition where one part of the intestine slides inside another part, kind of like a folding telescope.
That sounds incredibly painful.
It is. It creates a dangerous bowel obstruction. And the surveillance data showed this risk was specifically elevated when the vaccine was given to older infants.
So rather than scrapping the whole idea of protecting babies from rotavirus, they engineered a timing solution.
Exactly. By restricting the first dose of the newer vaccines to infants under 15 weeks, they completely eliminated that specific age-related risk profile.
That's incredible. But, the rigorous federal surveillance systems that caught that issue, they were born out of a much darker history.
Yes, they were.
I'm thinking of the Cutter incident of 1955.
Yeah, that is one of the most significant pharmaceutical disasters in American history.
Set the scene for us. What happened?
So, Jonas Salk's inactivated polio vaccine was licensed in 1955. It was a huge deal, a moment of global triumph. But just 2 weeks later, disaster struck.
2 weeks.
Just 2 weeks, a batch produced by Cutter Laboratories in Berkeley contained live, incompletely inactivated poliovirus.
Oh, no. And they gave it to people.
Roughly 200,000 children received these defective doses.
That is staggering.
The outcome was catastrophic. It caused roughly 40,000 cases of abortive polio.
Wait, abortive polio? What does that mean? Like the virus just went away?
It means the infection caused mild illness like fever, sore throat, muscle weakness, but it stopped short of entering the central nervous system to cause full paralysis.
Okay, but still, 40,000 kids getting sick from a vaccine.
Right, the fact that it was causing any disease at all meant the vaccine contained live, dangerous virus, and tragically didn't stop at abortive cases.
What else happened?
It caused over 150 cases of paralytic polio in children and their family contacts, and 10 deaths.
That is horrifying. A vaccine meant to stop paralysis actually causing it?
It was a profound trauma for the public health system. But this disaster directly catalyzed the creation of far stricter federal manufacturing oversight.
So it changed the laws.
Yes, it led to the Division of Biologic Standards, which is the direct ancestor of our modern FDA vaccine regulatory apparatus. The safety net around today's schedule exists because of the lessons learned from that terrible failure.
It's amazing how much history is baked into that chart. But it's not just about timing and oversight either. Sometimes the schedule shifts because of pure chemistry.
Chemistry.
Yeah, like how the vaccine is physically constructed.
Oh, right. This brings up the concept of conjugate vaccines.
Which is fascinating. Walk us through that.
Take the Hub vaccine, which protects against a bacteria that causes a deadly form of meningitis in infants. Or the pneumococcal vaccine, PCV.
The sources for this deep dive mention that the bacteria that cause these diseases have an outer coating made of polysaccharides, right?
Yes, which are basically complex sugars.
Hmm.
And early vaccines just use this sugar coating to try and train the immune system.
And how did that work out?
They completely failed in infants. An infant's immature immune system just could not see or mount a response to that sugar coating.
So the chemistry of the antigen wasn't clicking with the biology of the baby?
Exactly.
So if the baby can't see the sugar coating, what do? Do you strip the coating off? Or do you wrap it in something else?
You attach it to something they actually can see. In the late 1980s, scientists figured out how to chemically link or conjugate that weak sugar antigen to a strong, recognizable protein carrier.
Okay, so they glued it to a protein.
Exactly. When you inject this conjugated molecule, the infant's immune system immediately spots the carrier protein, attacks it, and in the collateral damage, it learns to recognize and fight the sugar coating too.
That is so clever. It's like a chemical disguise that forces the baby's immune system to learn.
A chemical disguise. That is exactly what it is.
That is incredible.
Huh.
But because the schedule is this complex, ever-shifting document full of chemical disguises and strict cutoffs, it leaves a lot of room for skepticism.
It really does.
And that skepticism has fueled major debates and dangerous misconceptions that nurses face every single day.
Which means we have to address the most consequential medical fraud in recent vaccine history.
You're talking about Andrew Wakefield's 1998 paper in The Lancet.
Yes, the infamous paper claiming a link between the MMR vaccine and autism.
The reality behind that paper is staggering when you look at the details in the source material.
It really is. First of all, it was based on a case series of just 12 children.
Just 12 kids.
Yes, and Wakefield had undisclosed financial conflicts of interest. He was actively being paid by lawyers who were preparing litigation against vaccine manufacturers.
That is a massive conflict of interest.
And worse, the data itself was manipulated to fit a predetermined conclusion.
So it was just outright fraud. And The Lancet eventually fully retracted the paper in 2010.
Right, and Wakefield was struck from the medical register and lost his license.
And since then, massive studies involving well over 1 million children across multiple countries have found absolutely zero association between MMR and autism.
Zero. But the psychological damage was durable, and it was devastating. Following that publication, MMR uptake in the UK plummeted from about 92% to under 80% in some areas.
And diseases don't care about retracted papers.
No, they don't. As a direct mathematical result of that drop in vaccination, measles, which had been nearly eliminated in the UK, returned. It was declared an endemic disease again in 2008.
That is so tragic. Which brings us to another huge misconception parents have. The too many too soon argument.
Oh, we hear this one a lot.
Yeah, parents look at that massive grid of shots and worry that the sheer volume of the modern schedule is going to completely overwhelm their baby's tiny immune system.
Visually, it is a very understandable fear. It looks like a lot. But biologically, it fundamentally misrepresents how the immune system works. In 2013, the Institute of Medicine conducted a massive formal review of the entire childhood schedule. They looked for cumulative safety issues and found absolutely zero evidence supporting the idea of immune overload.
But how is that possible, though, with so many more shots on the schedule today compared to, say, the 1980s?
Because of the purification processes we just talked about, like the cellular vaccines.
Oh, right, because we aren't using the whole cell anymore.
Exactly. Vaccine researchers like Paul Offit have pointed out that the total number of distinct antigens across the entire modern schedule is only a few hundred.
A few hundred. Is that a lot?
It's a tiny fraction of the antigens a child is exposed to by getting a single common cold.
Wait, really? A single cold?
Yes. The infant immune system's theoretical capacity to respond to distinct antigens is in the thousands simultaneously.
So a kid crawling on the floor, licking a plastic toy, and fighting off a runny nose is putting far more stress on their immune system than the entire vaccine schedule combined.
Precisely. Which is why the trend of the delayed schedule is so deeply problematic.
This is where parents want to space out the vaccines to be gentler on the child.
Right. It sounds so reasonable on the surface.
Yeah.
Let's just take it slow, do one shot at a time.
But it's not actually safer.
There is zero demonstrated safety benefit to delaying doses. But mathematically, delaying doses does one very concrete thing. It physically extends the window of time that a child is completely susceptible to diseases like pertussis and head meningitis.
So you are basically artificially prolonging that dangerous gap we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You're just leaving them vulnerable for longer.
What about the natural immunity argument?
Ah, yes.
The idea that getting the actual disease makes your immune system fundamentally stronger than a vaccine ever could.
Well, for some diseases, surviving a natural infection does provide robust immunity. But that argument completely ignores the terrifying cost of acquiring that immunity.
Right, because you actually have to survive the disease first.
Yeah. Exactly. Look at wild measles. If you catch wild measles, you face roughly a 1 in 1,000 risk of acute encephalitis, which is severe brain swelling that can cause permanent damage.
1 in 1,000 are not good odds when we're talking about severe brain damage.
They really aren't. And rarely, wild measles can cause something called SSPE, subacute sclerosing panencephalitis.
That sounds intense. What is that?
It is a fatal degenerative brain disease. And the truly terrifying part is that it doesn't even show up until 7 to 10 years after the original measles infection.
Wait, so a child could catch measles, survive it, seem completely fine, and a decade later develop a fatal brain disease because the virus was just hiding in their central nervous system.
Yes, that is exactly what happened.
Oh my God.
So when people talk about natural immunity, they are ignoring that vaccination provides comparable long-term protection without those massive catastrophic risks.
And when we zoom out from the individual child, these choices to delay a vaccine or rely on natural immunity, they don't just affect that one family, right?
Yeah, not at all.
They dictate the safety of the entire community.
This brings us to the math of the herd. Herd immunity.
Let's get into the math.
The schedule's coverage targets are meticulously calibrated based on how contagious a specific disease is. We measure that contagiousness with something called the basic reproduction number, or R0.
R0, and that is essentially how many people one infected person will spread the disease to, assuming they are in a completely susceptible population with no immunity.
Correct. And measles is one of the most contagious airborne viruses on Earth. Its R0 is estimated to be between 12 and 18.
So one person infects 12 to 18 other people. That's incredibly fast.
Because it spreads so easily, epidemiologists calculate that you need roughly 95% of the population to be vaccinated to reliably prevent the virus from transmitting.
95% is a really high bar, and we saw what happens when we dip below it during the Disneyland measles outbreak in 2014 and 2015.
Yeah, that was a wake-up call. There were 147 confirmed cases traced to exposure at the theme park, spreading across multiple states and even into Canada and Mexico.
And the crucial takeaway from that outbreak is that it happened because of localized pockets of under-vaccination.
Exactly. Think of the virus like a spark in a forest. If 95% of the trees are damp, meaning they are vaccinated, the spark just fizzles out.
But if your statewide average is 95%, yet one specific community or school district drops to 80%.
That is a dry patch of freeze. That is where the spark catches, herd immunity breaks down, and the disease rips through the population.
That makes total sense. This tailored approach to epidemiology is also why the schedule is not identical worldwide.
Right.
Because I hear people say, well, in Europe they do it differently, so our schedule must be wrong.
It's a common misconception. The schedule molds to the environment it's in. For example, countries with endemic tuberculosis give the BCG vaccine right at birth.
But the U.S. doesn't do that.
No, the U.S. schedule omits the BCG vaccine entirely because TB incidence here is so low that the risk-benefit analysis shifts.
So it's hyper-localized.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Different rotavirus strains, different yellow fever risks. Public health officials constantly tweak the schedule based on what is actively threatening the population.
Speaking of tweaking the schedule for efficiency, what about combo vaccines? Like the MMR or DTaP, you sometimes hear the myth that these combo shots are just bundled together for pharmaceutical profit.
The reality is much more practical than that.
Yeah.
Combination vaccines exist to reduce the number of physical injections and the number of clinic visits required.
Which goes back to the logistical constraints we talked about at the beginning.
Yes. The data clearly shows that when you reduce the logistical burden on families, you significantly increase the likelihood that a child actually completes the full series.
And as we just discussed with the forest fire analogy, completing the series is what keeps those vital herd immunity numbers above 95%.
Exactly. It all connects back to the math of the herd.
Let's bring this all back to you, the listener. If you are a nurse working in a clinic tomorrow, this schedule is your daily tool.
It's what you live by.
Right. You are calculating missed windows, figuring out the catch-up grids, but more importantly, you are sitting across from hesitant parents.
And when you understand the biological reasoning, why maternal antibodies mean MMR waits until 12 months, why the rotavirus cutoff exists because of V8-year surveillance, why delaying doses just extends the window of vulnerability. That is how you build trust.
Because answering "it's on the schedule" isn't enough anymore. When you can explain the mechanics of the acellular pertussis vaccine or how chemical conjugation works, you demystify the entire process.
And the impact of understanding that why cannot be overstated. This complex, intimidating chart is really a marvel of public health engineering. The CDC estimates that vaccination of cohorts born in recent decades has prevented hundreds of thousands of deaths and millions of hospitalizations in the U.S. alone.
It really is an incredible achievement. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought about the future.
The future of this schedule.
Yeah. We started by comparing the schedule to a static engineering blueprint. But, as we've seen, it's actually a living ecosystem.
Absolutely.
With vaccine technology rapidly evolving right now, especially with the massive advancements in mRNA technology we've seen recently, how will the outer boundaries of immunology and the inner boundaries of logistics shift?
That's a great question.
How will this already dense blueprint stretch and adapt to accommodate entirely new classes of vaccines in the schedule of the future?
The tracks are always moving, the
Yeah.
pathogens adapt, the technology adapts, and the schedule has to adapt right along with them.
It's a constant balancing act, so
Right.
keep that in mind the next time you look at that chart.